The wind cut through the barbed wire fences like a whisper that refused to stop. Dust moved slowly across the camp yard, mixing with the low voices of soldiers finishing their shifts. Private Daniel Carter had already been standing guard for 6 hours. Nothing ever changed here. Same fences, same tired faces, same quiet tension hanging in the air. Until he noticed her. A young woman, barely older than 18, moved carefully near the supply area. She kept her head low, scanning the ground as if she didn't want to be seen. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Something felt off. He watched as she slipped behind a crate. Too fast, too careful. Training told him what it meant. Someone was hiding something. He stepped forward. "Hey, stop right there!" The girl froze instantly. Slowly, she turned around. Her hands were shaking, and in them, wrapped in cloth, was a piece of bread. Silence filled the space between them. She didn't run. She didn't argue. She just lowered her eyes as if she already expected punishment. Daniel felt the tension in his chest rise. Guards were supposed to report theft immediately. Rules were clear. No exceptions. He took another step closer. "Did you take that from the kitchen?" She nodded slightly. No excuses. No anger. Just fear. For a moment, Daniel saw something that made him pause. Not defiance, not criminal intent, but exhaustion. The kind that came from someone who had been trying to survive for too long. His radio buzzed softly on his belt. He should call it in. That's what everyone expected. But instead, he hesitated. The girl swallowed hard and whispered, almost too quiet to hear, "I'm sorry. I haven't eaten since yesterday." Daniel's grip tightened. Rules said one thing. His instincts said another. He looked around. The yard was empty. No one was watching. And that's when he made a choice. One that would leave the entire camp talking by morning. The silence inside the barracks felt heavier than the cold outside. Private Daniel Carter placed the small piece of bread on the wooden table between them. The young woman stared at it as if it might disappear. "You should eat," he said quietly. She hesitated. Her eyes moved from the bread to him, then to the other prisoners watching from the bunks. No one spoke. No one moved. Daniel knew what they were thinking. A guard helping a prisoner was something people talked about, and not always kindly. "Go on," he added. Her hands trembled as she reached forward, breaking off a small piece instead of grabbing the whole loaf. Even now, she was careful, almost afraid to take too much. Daniel noticed that. It reminded him of home, of people who knew hunger too well. Outside, boots crunched on gravel. Someone was coming. The girl froze again. Daniel quickly stepped closer, pretending to inspect the table, blocking the view just as another soldier passed by the open doorway. The moment stretched endlessly. Then the footsteps faded away. He exhaled. "You can't keep doing this," he whispered. "If someone else catches you—" "I know," she said softly. "I didn't want to steal, but there are others. They're weaker than me." She glanced toward the bunks. Only then did Daniel notice how thin some of the prisoners looked. One woman avoided eye contact entirely, pulling a blanket tighter around herself. This wasn't just about her. It hit him harder than expected. Rules were written on paper. Reality lived here, in tired faces and quiet desperation. He looked down at the bread again. For a brief second, he considered reporting everything. It would be safer, cleaner, no risk. Instead, he did something even more dangerous. He reached into his pocket and pulled out another ration, his own. The girl's eyes widened. "No, you'll get in trouble." He gave a short half-smile. "Then we keep this quiet." She stared at him confused. "Why?" Daniel paused. Because sometimes the line between enemy and human didn't look the way people expected. But he didn't say that. Instead, he nodded toward the food. "Eat. And share it." She swallowed hard. Not from fear this time, but something closer to disbelief. Behind them, one of the prisoners quietly began to cry. Daniel suddenly realized the situation had changed. This wasn't just a small act anymore. People had seen, and word inside a camp moved faster than wind. By tomorrow morning, everyone would know, and not everyone would approve. By morning, the atmosphere inside the camp had changed. Daniel felt it the moment he stepped through the gate. Conversations stopped when he passed. Guards who usually joked over coffee watched him a little longer than normal. Nothing direct, just small looks that stayed a second too long. News traveled fast here. Too fast. Inside the barracks, the same quiet tension waited for him. The prisoners pretended not to notice him, but their eyes followed every movement. The young woman from the night before sat near the wall, holding herself smaller than before, as if trying to disappear. She didn't look up. Daniel understood why. Kindness could be dangerous, for both sides. He kept his face neutral and made his rounds, pretending everything was normal, but he noticed something new. More bread pieces than usual, small portions shared quietly between prisoners. She had done exactly what she promised. Shared it. That should have felt good. Instead, it made him nervous, because acts like that left traces. As he checked the windows, another guard stepped beside him. Corporal Reed, older, sharper, the type who noticed things others missed. "You getting soft on them, Carter?" Reed asked casually. Daniel shrugged. "Just doing my job." Reed didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted toward the prisoners. "They say someone's been helping them. Food's going missing." Daniel's chest tightened, but he kept his expression blank. "Rumors," he said. Reed gave a slow nod. "Yeah, rumors." He walked away, but the warning hung in the air. Daniel suddenly realized how thin the line was becoming. Later that evening, he returned to the barracks for another shift. Rain tapped softly against the wooden roof. The young woman approached slowly this time, careful, hesitant. "You shouldn't come near me," he whispered. She stopped. "I just wanted to say thank you." He shook his head slightly. "People are watching." She lowered her voice. "You didn't just help me. You helped all of them." Daniel looked past her. At the exhausted faces, the quiet relief that hadn't been there days before. For the first time, the place felt human, and that scared him, because humanity wasn't part of the rules. Suddenly, voices echoed outside. Boots. Several of them. The door opened sharply. 2 officers stepped inside. The barracks went silent. One of them held a small ration packet. "Someone's been stealing," the officer said coldly, scanning the room. No one moved. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. This wasn't a casual check. Someone had reported it. The officer's eyes landed on him. "Private Carter, mind explaining?" The room froze. The young woman's hands clenched. Daniel realized this was the moment everything could collapse, not just for him, but for everyone who had eaten because of that one decision. He straightened his posture and made a choice again. The barracks felt smaller than ever. Rain continued tapping against the roof, the only sound brave enough to move. The 2 officers stood in the center of the room like shadows that refused to leave. Private Daniel Carter held his posture steady. "Private Carter," the officer repeated, holding up the ration packet. "We're missing supplies. You were on duty last night." Every pair of eyes turned toward him. The prisoners stayed perfectly still. Even breathing felt too loud. Daniel forced calm into his voice. "I followed my rounds, nothing unusual." The officer studied him carefully, as if weighing every word. Behind Daniel he sensed movement. The young woman lowering her head, trying not to draw attention. Her hands gripped the edge of the bunk so tightly her knuckles turned pale. The officer stepped closer. "Funny thing," he said quietly. "Someone says they saw extra food inside this barracks." Silence. No one spoke, because everyone knew one wrong word could change everything. Daniel felt the pressure building in his chest. If he admitted anything, it wouldn't just be him facing consequences. The prisoners could lose what little trust had begun to grow. But lying to an officer was its own risk. He chose the only safe middle ground. "Maybe someone made a mistake with inventory," he said calmly. The officer's gaze hardened. Outside, thunder rolled faintly. Then something unexpected happened. From the back bunk, an older prisoner slowly stood up. Her voice was quiet but firm. "We shared what we had," she said. The officers turned toward her instantly. Daniel's heart dropped. This wasn't supposed to happen. The older woman continued, her expression steady. "No stealing, just sharing." The room felt charged, like a wire pulled too tight. One officer scoffed, "That's not how this works." The young woman suddenly stepped forward too, the one Daniel had caught the night before. "It was my fault," she said. Her voice shook, but she kept going. "I took food. No one else should be blamed." Daniel looked at her, stunned. She was protecting him. The officer took a step toward her, but Daniel moved slightly, just enough to place himself between them without making it obvious. A dangerous line. The officer noticed. Their eyes locked. For a moment, the entire barracks felt suspended in time. Guards, prisoners, rain, silence, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, the officer lowered the ration packet. "This isn't over," he said coldly. The two officers turned and left, the door slamming behind them. Only after their footsteps faded did anyone breathe again. The young woman sank back onto the bunk, exhausted. Daniel rubbed his temple. What started as a small decision had become something bigger, something that couldn't be hidden anymore. And he realized the next move wouldn't come from him alone. The camp had changed, and people were starting to choose sides. After the officers left, no one spoke for a long time. The rain softened outside, leaving only the sound of distant footsteps and the occasional creak of old wood. The tension inside the barracks didn't fade. It only changed shape. Daniel stood near the door, pretending to check his notes, but his mind was racing. Someone had reported them. Someone inside the camp was watching closely. He glanced toward the prisoners. The young woman who had confessed sat quietly now, staring at the floor. The others kept their distance from her, not out of anger, but fear. Helping each other suddenly felt dangerous. Daniel knew what came next. Inspections, questions, maybe transfers, maybe worse. He should have walked away when he had the chance. Instead, he found himself stepping closer to her. "You didn't have to say anything," he whispered. She gave a faint, tired smile. "You helped us," she said softly. "I couldn't let you stand alone." Before he could answer, voices sounded outside again, louder this time. Orders being shouted. Doors opening and closing down the barracks row. Something was happening. A younger guard rushed past the doorway. "Full inspection tomorrow," he called to another soldier. "Command wants everything checked." Daniel felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Tomorrow. That meant tonight was the last quiet moment they would have. Inside the room, the news spread without words. Prisoners exchanged looks. Some began quietly hiding small personal items. Others simply sat still, as if already preparing for bad news. The young woman pulled her blanket tighter around herself. "They're going to punish everyone," she whispered. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't supposed to reassure her. Distance was safer, for both of them, but he couldn't ignore the fear in her voice. "Just stay calm," he said. "Don't draw attention." She looked up at him. "Why are you doing this?" The question caught him off guard. He searched for an answer and found none that felt simple, because he had seen too many tired eyes, because rules felt different when standing face to face with people, but he only said, "Because someone should." For a brief moment, the tension eased. Then a loud whistle echoed across the camp. Signal for lights out. Darkness slowly filled the barracks. Daniel moved toward the door, ready to leave, when he heard a quiet voice behind him. "Thank you," she said again. He paused. Outside, the sky had cleared slightly, moonlight reflecting off wet ground. He realized something unsettling. If tomorrow went badly, this might be the last time things felt human here. As he stepped outside, he noticed shadows moving between buildings. Guards talking quietly, pointing toward the barracks. The rumor had grown, and tomorrow, someone would have to take the blame. Daniel looked back once more at the dimly lit window. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. The siren sounded before sunrise. Cold air moved through the camp as guards lined up outside the barracks. Boots struck the ground in sharp rhythm, louder than usual, more serious. Orders were short. Faces were tense. This wasn't a routine inspection. Private Daniel Carter felt it immediately. Command had arrived. 2 military vehicles stood near the main gate, their engines silent but intimidating. Officers stepped out with clipboards and rigid expressions, people who cared more about rules than stories. Inside the barracks, the prisoners sat quietly, waiting. No whispers, no movement, only anticipation. Daniel entered with the inspection group, forcing his expression neutral. He avoided looking directly at the young woman, but he could feel her presence like a weight in the room. The lead officer spoke loudly. "Everyone stand, hands visible." Wood creaked as prisoners rose slowly from bunks. The officers began searching. Blankets lifted, bags checked, hidden corners examined. Every small sound echoed. Daniel kept his eyes forward, but his pulse grew faster with every minute. One wrong discovery could end everything. The young woman stood perfectly still, staring at the floor. Across the room, another prisoner trembled. The officer noticed. "You, step forward." The woman hesitated, then obeyed. The officer reached into her blanket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. The room froze. A small piece of bread. Not much, barely enough for one person, but enough to change the mood instantly. The officer held it up. "So, we do have theft." The prisoners lowered their eyes. Daniel felt the air grow heavy again. He stepped forward slightly. "Sir." The officer raised a hand to silence him. "No." He turned toward the prisoners. "Someone here is responsible. If no one speaks, everyone suffers." The words hung in the air like a threat. Daniel saw panic move across the room. The young woman's shoulders tightened. She was going to confess again. He knew it, and that would end badly. Before she could move, Daniel spoke. "It's not like that." Every head turned. Even the officers looked surprised. The lead officer narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Daniel chose his words carefully. "They're hungry. They share what they have, that's all." Silence followed. The officer stared at him, disbelief mixed with irritation. "This is a prison camp, Carter, not a charity." Daniel held his ground. For a moment he thought he had gone too far. Then something unexpected happened. One of the older officers, quiet until now, looked around the room slowly. His gaze paused on the exhausted faces, on the thin hands gripping blankets, on the quiet fear filling the space. He said nothing, but his expression softened slightly. The lead officer noticed. The tension shifted, small but real. Finally, the officer lowered the bread. "We continue inspection," he said coldly. "No punishment. Not yet." The search moved on. Daniel exhaled slowly, but he understood the truth now. This wasn't over. Command had noticed him, and sooner or later, they would decide whether his actions were compassion or disobedience. As the officers moved deeper into the barracks, the young woman looked up briefly. Their eyes met for a split second. No words, just understanding. Outside, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, but inside the camp, the pressure was only growing. The inspection ended without punishment, but no one felt relieved. That was the dangerous part. Silence meant decisions were being made somewhere else. Outside, the camp slowly returned to routine, yet everything felt different. Guards spoke quieter. Prisoners avoided eye contact. Even the air seemed heavier, as if waiting for something to happen. Private Daniel Carter walked his patrol with careful steps. He could feel eyes on him, not just from prisoners, from his own unit. 2 soldiers stood near the supply shed as he passed. "That's him," one whispered. Daniel pretended not to hear. Rumors didn't need proof, they only needed repetition. When he entered the barracks again later that evening, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Conversations stopped. Faces turned toward him. Not with fear this time, but with something more complicated. Respect. and that made him uneasy. The young woman sat near the window, light fading around her silhouette. She looked up as he approached, but didn't speak. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Finally, she broke the silence. "They're saying you defended us." Daniel shook his head slightly. "I just told the truth." She gave a faint smile. "In places like this, that's rare." Before he could answer, shouting erupted outside, a sharp command. Then another. Daniel moved to the doorway instinctively. 2 guards were escorting a prisoner across the yard, one of the younger men from another barracks. His hands were clenched, face pale with fear. The entire camp watched through windows. "What happened?" the young woman whispered. Daniel didn't know, but he understood what it meant. Someone had been blamed. The scene lasted only seconds before they disappeared around the corner, but the silence afterward felt crushing. Inside the barracks, tension returned instantly. The message was clear. Rules still ruled everything here. Daniel stepped back inside, closing the door quietly. The young woman spoke again, softer this time. "You shouldn't risk more because of us." He hesitated. Maybe she was right. He had already crossed boundaries that couldn't easily be repaired. But when he looked around the room, at the exhausted faces, the cautious hope that had appeared over the last days, something inside him resisted pulling away. "If people stop helping each other," he said quietly, "then this place wins." She looked at him carefully, as if memorizing the words. Outside, the evening light faded into deep blue. The camp grew quieter, too quiet. Daniel felt it again, that sense of something approaching. Footsteps sounded in the distance, heavy ones, not ordinary patrols. He stepped toward the window and saw a group of officers walking across the yard, heading directly toward this barracks. His stomach tightened. This wasn't random. This was about him. The young woman noticed his expression. "What is it?" Daniel kept watching. "They've made a decision," he said quietly. The officer stopped just outside the door. A shadow crossed the window. The handle slowly turned, and, for the first time since all this started, Daniel wasn't sure he could protect anyone anymore. The door opened slowly. 3 officers stepped inside. No shouting, no anger, just silence. The kind that made everyone hold their breath. Private Daniel Carter stood still, waiting. The lead officer looked around the barracks before speaking. "Private Carter, step outside." The words felt heavier than any shout. The prisoners watched quietly as he followed the officers into the cold evening air. The sky was dark now, camp lights casting long shadows across the ground. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the officer turned toward him. "You broke procedure," he said firmly. "You interfered with rations. You involved yourself where you shouldn't." Daniel kept his voice calm. They were hungry. The officer stared at him. "That's not your decision to make?" Silence stretched between them. Daniel expected punishment, transfer, removal, something final. Instead, the older officer, the quiet one from the inspection, stepped forward. "I walked through that barracks today," he said slowly. "I've seen camps where fear controls everything. This one felt different." The lead officer frowned. "That isn't the point." "Maybe it should be," the older man replied. He turned to Daniel. "You didn't hide what you did when questioned. That matters." The younger officer hesitated, clearly unhappy. Finally, he sighed. "No official charges," he said coldly. "But this ends now. No more exceptions." Daniel nodded once. "Yes, sir." The officers walked away, their footsteps fading into the night. He stood alone for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. He wasn't punished, but he wasn't safe either. When he returned to the barracks, the atmosphere felt different, quieter, warmer somehow. The prisoners didn't rush toward him. They simply watched. The young woman stepped forward slowly. "Are you leaving?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "Not today." Relief crossed her face. Small, but real. He looked around the room. No cheering, no dramatic celebration. Just something simpler. Hope. Over the following days, small changes spread through the camp. Nothing official, just subtle things. Guards spoke softer. Prisoners stood a little straighter. Food was still measured, rules still strict, but the invisible wall between people felt thinner. Daniel realized something important. One small decision hadn't changed the system, but it had changed the way people looked at each other inside it. On his last evening shift that week, he paused near the doorway. The young woman sat near the window, sharing her ration with another prisoner, exactly as she had promised from the beginning. She noticed him watching and gave a small nod. No words were needed. Outside, the wind moved across the camp fences again. Same place, same rules, but something human remained, something that hadn't been there before. Daniel turned and continued his patrol into the fading light, knowing most people would never hear about what happened here, but those who were present would remember. Not the punishment, not the rules, just the moment someone chose kindness, and everything quietly changed.